Thank you, Daphne. I noticed in the prelude you played this morning there was a little bit of Amazing Grace, which, bearing in mind the Quaker commitment to social justice and their heavy involvement in abolitionist movement, was remarkably appropriate. We often seem to do that with the music here. The topic of today's address was the Quaker movement, and it was suggested by June Marriott. And I immediately thought, that's interesting, and forgot to ask, why me? I became a Unitarian rather than a Quaker back in 1998, not for any deep and significant reason, just geography. The Unitarian meeting house was very easy to locate, 99 Osmond Terrace, Norwood. The Quaker meeting house is hidden. It's a little grey, wooden, prefabricated building tucked in behind St. Peter's Cathedral. It was brought out to Australia from England by ship, and the first time I looked for it, I couldn't find it, and was a bit shy about intruding on Anglican land. So I visited the Unitarians, and Mark Alstrom quoted Shakespeare in his address, and I met lots of interesting and friendly people. There was a meditation group that met on Mondays, a women's group that started up on Friday nights, a discussion group led by Jane. In short, I was happy with what I found, and have only occasionally attended Quaker meetings and discussion groups when close friends are contributing, or when I feel the need for silent worship. My other connection to Quakers is through my Tasmanian relatives. My cousin Andrew was having a difficult time at a state school because it didn't want to take the risk of being sued if he died on the soccer pitch. Leukemia treatment back in the 1960s was nowhere near as effective as it is today, and Andrew's parents wanted him to participate in the sports he loved. It was Friends School in Hobart that was prepared to take my uncle and aunt's word for it that they would not sue if Andrew collapsed at school. The last year of Andrew's life was happy because of the spiritual support and trust in goodness that are hallmarks of the Quaker way. And the other aspect of Quakerism that we're all aware of is their pacifism and their dedication to humanitarian and environmental organisations, such as Amnesty International and Greenpeace. We also think of Quakers as silent worshippers, without ministers or organs or choirs or hymns or sermons. 2 or 3 people speaking for a minute or so each in an hour-long meeting may be described afterwards as a very noisy meeting. But 'twas not always thus. As Sandy read earlier, not all Quaker meetings are silent. There are Quaker preachers. There are Quaker hymns, such as the one we sang, How Can I Keep From Singing? There was even once a military general nicknamed the Fighting Quaker, one Smedley Butler, a Major General in the US Marine Corps, most decorated Marine in US history at the time of his death. His Quaker credentials emerge in the title of his famous anti-war tract, War is a Racket, 1935. Like our best answer respondent in Sandy's reading today, I don't know any evangelical Quakers, and I've never been to a program meeting. So I won't attempt to talk about those kinds of Quakers. Nor will I be talking about a leading Ku Klux Klansman. I swear you can find anything on the internet. Even the name of this alleged Quaker sounds like an aberration, Daisy Douglas Barr. I'm just not going there. Why not? Well, if you really dug deep, you could probably find a Unitarian fundamentalist. And it would not show anything more than the gap that you find occasionally in humans of any persuasion between what they profess and what they actually believe. We'll just stay in the mainstream. Australian Quakers are liberal. Their meetings take the form of silent worship. The discussion groups employ the habit of inserting silences. You do not overlap. Time is left for all to reflect on what the previous speaker has said, rather than presuming to respond or comment. I've been to several of these meetings in Adelaide, and I notice that people do not presume to speak for others. You speak your own truth, contradicting analysing or debunking previous speakers is not the Quaker way. Even staff meetings at Friends' School begin and end with a period of silence. The cut and thrust of passionate argument is avoided in favour of reflective responses. You don't shoot from the hip. You leave a pause well beyond what is normal in conversation between speakers. I'm sure that Hildegard of Bingen would have approved the Quaker modus operandi in meetings. She once wrote, "God cannot be shaken out nor strained through a sieve by human argument." Now, there is no such thing as the Quaker movement because, like Unitarians, each Quaker meeting house develops its own culture and activities, and these groups meet annually to share ideas, not to impose their views on each other's meetings. And this year's annual meeting will be in Adelaide. Anyone is welcome. Quakers turn up in many worthwhile human rights and environmental committees and working groups, and I think it would be fair to say that in comparison with Unitarians, Quakers feel a stronger imperative to involve themselves in social action. But Quakers have not always been seen as mild-mannered peaceniks or community activists. The word Quaker is not a term of endearment. It was intended as a put-down and would have been effective had the Religious Society of Friends been less resilient. George Fox, who was born in 1624 and who died before the end of the 17th century at the age of 66, was an English dissenter and a founder of the Religious Society of Friends. Now, he was imprisoned several times at Nottingham and in Derby, where in 1650 he was imprisoned for blasphemy. A judge mocked his exhortation to tremble at the word of the Lord by calling him and his followers Quakers. And now this is the common name for the Society of Friends. It's rather like wogs out of work, isn't it? Wogs was used as a term of abuse and became a term of endearment with Italian and Greek people here. At this point, I'd like to give you a bit of a potted history of the beginnings of Quakerism. The aforesaid George Fox was the eldest of 4 children. His father, Christopher Fox, was a Puritan, dubbed the Righteous Christer by his neighbours. He was a church warden, relatively wealthy, and so when he died, he was able to leave his son a substantial legacy. From childhood, George was of a serious religious disposition. There's no record of any formal schooling, but he did learn to read and write. And he said himself, "When I came to 11 years of age, I knew pureness and righteousness, for while I was a child, I was taught how to walk to be kept pure. The Lord taught me to be faithful in all things and to act faithfully 2 ways, inwardly to God and outwardly to man." As he grew up, his relatives thought to have made me a priest, but he was instead apprenticed to a local grazier. This suited his contemplative temperament, and he became well known for diligence amongst the wool traders. A constant obsession for Fox was the pursuit of simplicity in life, meaning humility and abandonment of luxury, and the short time he spent as a shepherd was important to the formation of this view. Toward the end of his life, he wrote a letter for general circulation pointing out that Abel, Noah, Abraham, Jacob, Moses, and David were all keepers of sheep or cattle, and that a learned education should not therefore be seen as a qualification for the ministry. It was not that young George thought that he knew it all. He did actively seek out the company of clergy, but he found no comfort from them, for they seemed unable to help with the matters that were troubling him. The early Quakers were earnest and not lots of fun. They were, unlike their modern counterparts, very much into denunciations, and they exasperated the Church of England clerics who would have preferred young George to lighten up with a glass or 2. One clergyman in Warwickshire advised him to take tobacco, which George disliked. Another to sing psalms. Another in Coventry lost his temper when Fox accidentally stood on a flower in his garden. A third suggested bloodletting.